Whether you're a customer looking to make a purchase or a business trying to streamline your sales processes, friction can be the enemy that slows everything down. It's important to understand the buying process, the frictions that exist in it, and how they can be addressed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revenue Lounge podcast. I am your host, Randy Likas, and today we're going to dive deep into the strategies, innovations, and insights that can help us identify and eliminate friction from the buying process. And joining me today is Mary Grothe. Mary is the Chief Revenue Officer at PNI. She's a revenue leader, entrepreneur, global keynote speaker, the host of the podcast Destination Remarkable, and former contributor to the podcast Revenue Radio. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So, Mary, maybe we can start and you can tell me a little bit about your role currently at PNI.
I'm a Chief Revenue Officer, and I love it because it's the actual definition of a Chief Revenue Officer, not that other definition of a Chief Revenue Officer, which is a glorified sales leader, which there's absolutely no shame in just calling them a Chief Sales Officer or VP of Sales and not giving them a CRO title, because that's at its core not what a CRO is. So a Chief Revenue Officer should have the privilege of overseeing all of revenue. So we're talking about brand, marketing, the go-to-market strategy, sales, all pre-sales elements, customer success, any retention efforts, customer marketing, and whatnot. I have the privilege to do that. I love my role. I grew up in payroll. I started in payroll when I was 22. So some people are like, huh, payroll? Like that's a thing? Yes, it's a thing. There are payroll companies out there. They actually process the payroll checks, pay taxes. It's a whole industry. I started in that industry. I'm so glad to be rejoining it after my crazy career that I've had thus far.
That's great. How did you get into revenue, whether it be from the operations standpoint or from a sales leader standpoint? What's your story?
Getting into revenue, my gosh, I'm one of those people that knew my whole life this is what I wanted to do, and that's a joke. When I was 22, I had just somehow made it through 4 of the worst years of my life, and it's a shock that I wasn't dead or in jail. And at 22, I just had a fire inside of me saying I was worth more, capable of more, and I needed to turn my life around. And I read this thing called a newspaper. It's like this piece of paper and it had some print words on it. Okay, so I found a job in the newspaper and I was excited because it was only 4 miles from my house, and I thought, oh, short commute. And I got an office job as a district sales assistant for a payroll company. I didn't know what any of that meant. But I took to the job super fast and I loved it. I was supporting a mid-market team of 8 salespeople, and they were the #1 team in the country. So I got to surround myself by these ultra top performers, and I came from pretty rough childhood background and didn't have a lot and didn't really understand what it looked like to make a lot of money or have nice things in life. And I was surrounded by it. Work hard, play hard, really nice thing. I thought, I didn't even know this life existed. How do I get that life? And they said, well, you could go into sales, but you'd have to go through this big, long learning. You got to get a college degree. You have to start out in small business sales. Then maybe you can work your way up. And I'm a little type A. So I said, how about no? I made an 18-month plan. I said, how about I do these things instead? I handed it to my manager, and I was really vying for a spot on that mid-market sales team because that's who I was supporting. I liked the mid-market, but I said to him, I'm going to do all this. He says, if you do half of what's on here, I'll put you in. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And I accomplished everything on the list. And I remember that I received a phone call. I was called into the sales manager's office, and our second level manager was on the phone, and he's like, hey, we just want to let you know we're going to welcome you onto the team. And it was one of the greatest moments. I was 24 years old and 2 years as a sales assistant, got to work on some cool projects, predominantly in the RevOps space. We were doing a migration from ACT to Salesforce, and it was my first introduction. Nobody called it RevOps in 2006, just so we're clear. But I got to go through this migration. I got to learn about sales processes and building it all out, and I loved it. But then I got into sales, had a great 5-year run. I actually was the #1 rep, which is a fun part of the story because nobody thought I could do it, and I was young and still didn't have my college degree, and I was working on it but hadn't earned it yet. And anyway, became the #1 rep. That was a lot of fun. I sold more than number 2 and 3 combined on the rankings, shattered ceilings, broke records. It was a ton of fun, but had a great run with the payroll company, left to go work for one of my clients, and took a big title, VP of Sales and Marketing, for a very young girl. and I was able to help a very small business quadruple in size in 7 months. And I fell in love with that. I thought, if I can be good at payroll, but then I can also be good on more aspects of revenues. That's the first time that my degree was in marketing, but it was the first time I ever really had to do anything that looked like marketing, was successful at it. I'm like, I love both of these things. And so I started my first company, did that for 3 years, helped 36 small businesses grow their companies, and then went back to the payroll company for 3 years. Started my second company, which was a whole journey in revenue and building what ended up being a fractional chief revenue officer firm and outsourced RevOps firm. Just exited from that, and now I have my very first, which is funny, I feel like I did it in reverse order, very first full-time chief revenue officer position now. Yes, I was the founder and CEO of a company for 5.5 years that did fractional chief revenue officer work, but I was never a chief revenue officer. But that's okay, I am now. So I just do things a little bit backwards in my life. But that's how I got into revenue, and once I got in, I've never looked back.
What a great story. I love it. So diverse, right? And really, you did it on your own. I mean, you recognized this is what I want, and you went after it. That's a great story.
Thank you.
How would you define revenue operations?
Yeah, first let's go with the definition. So, fun story. In 2019, I was a year and a half into running my second company, and this whole buzz around RevOps, what is RevOps, came about. And I was sitting down with a technology professional, and we were trying to define it, going back and forth. I don't know, what do you think it is? What do you think it is? I don't know, but this is great. So I adopted the definition that revenue operations was the combination of the operational workflow, the actual people doing the work in revenue. So the operational workflow, thinking about the behaviors, the process, the job, from marketing, sales, CS, and then the technology that supports that. So you have the human component, the technology component over the entire employee life cycle, and that's how I would define revenue operations, is because you have to look at the tech stack, but you also have to look at the way people do work. Now you want to make it even more complex. You actually add in the buyer and the customer into that, buyer's journey, customer journey, and you make sure you have 3 tiers aligned, and I think that that's where you can remove some of the friction out of your process. But anywho, so that's how I would define revenue operations. I could not function as a chief revenue officer if I did not have the RevOps component of our business defined. In fact, when I first started with this role, I inherited an okay revenue engine, but it needed to be taken to the next level. And when I heard that the company wanted to adopt a pretty aggressive growth goal, so actually going to 50 million in 5 years, which is a near tripling in size, I thought, there's no way we can do that if we don't have infrastructure that will support the growth. And I believe that most infrastructure conversations and activities that we do inside, it's all RevOps based. So we're looking at the tech stack, we're looking at the buyer's journey, customer journey. We're getting into very granular detail on the nuances between the verticals and types of buyers that we serve, the expectations that they have, the different roles that we have, how our departments are structured, and breaking down the walls, barriers between those. And then the technology piece is critical. So, we made a lot of changes in my first 6 months, made some investments in some new technologies, got rid of some technologies. We upgraded some roles. We created a whole new revenue engine in order for us to go back out to market. We rebranded as a part of that as well. We used to be Payroll Network Inc., hence the PNI. Now it's PNI-HCM, which is Human Capital Management, but refreshed a lot of things. Now I have learned, because I'm a very high optimist, excited, type A stuff, quick, fast decisions. And I've learned through my entrepreneurial journey of running a company that the best decisions are data-driven decisions. Opinions are still valuable, but data is priceless. With that, revenue operations feeds me what I need every single day in order to function, operate, and make the best decisions for my company, and not have too much reliance on the gut instincts, the feels, the opinions. I need it to be validated with the data. And we built good infrastructure. So I feel like the data is good. But yeah, RevOps is deeply ingrained in my life.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. It's certainly not a rebranding of sales operations, right? There's a whole different complexity involved to do revenue operations, correct? So let's switch gears a little bit. So let's talk about the friction, and let's talk about it from a little bit of a different angle. As a founder of a company and as CRO, you've probably been the customer on the customer side of things a few different times. What's been your biggest frustrations as a buyer in the buying process?
That model that someone came up with 10 years ago that everybody adopted, where you have BDRs and that account executives and sales engineers and all these layers in the process. Boy, is it annoying. I understand if you're talking about an outbound strategy where you might segment the work because you have somebody who is more proficient in outbound prospecting and can do higher volume transactional type work, but when they get a qualified opportunity, they toss it over the fence, cool. But when you're an inbound lead and you have a buyer with money looking to spend the money, the rigid sales process that many, especially tech companies, have adopted drove me nuts. So as a founder CEO, funny story, I bought a new payroll system, which we outgrew the one that we had. We scaled up pretty rapidly in 2021. It was a big growth year for us. And the payroll provider I had, I just didn't feel like it met our needs anymore. So I went to market to buy payroll. Any salesperson that wants to do any amount of research before they hop on a sales meeting with me can see that I sold a product for 5 years in one stint and 3 years in the second stint. They can see that I had 8 years directly working for a national payroll provider. It's so shocking of how few reps actually do the research step and know who they're talking to. So I try to make everyone's life better, mostly because I'm a high D. So like on the disc, DISC, driver, influencer, steady relator, conscientious thinker, or cautious thinker. I'm a high D. I'm also an influencer. I talk with my hands. But a high D when I'm in my executive, like wearing the executive hat. Time is my most precious asset. So I'll slow down in this story. I need to buy a new payroll system. I know who I'm not reaching out to. Okay, cross those off the list. I wanted to explore PEO, which is different from traditional payroll because it lumps in benefits and stuff. Just because of the size we were, we couldn't get large group benefits. I'm like, I'm going to investigate a PEO and see if that's something that we can do this stage of the game. But I also want to look at payroll, and I want really good technology. I didn't want some old, outdated, clunky stuff that's just been reskinned, and that's some of the stuff I used to sell at my former company. And so I start doing some searches online, and of course then I get probably flagged through some intense software. Somebody knows that I'm searching. So all of a sudden I get delivered an ad for a company and on Instagram. I'm like, wow, they found a payroll. I'm like, that's awesome. So I click it as I'm sitting on my couch one night surfing in my newsfeed, and I become an inbound lead. And on the inbound form, you have to answer some questions. I was like, I got this, I can do that. So then I get an email from the BDR. Before they can set a meeting with me, I have to answer the exact 5 questions I've already answered on the form. So I'm like, okay, I'll play because I really wanted to see this software. So I answer these questions. Then I wait, and I wait. And I finally hear back, and okay, I passed the test, so now I can get scheduled with an account executive. So then we have to go through calendar volley. We finally get some things scheduled, and we finally get on a meeting, and I just want to see it. I just want to see the technology. I already can qualify myself. I know what I need. I've been around the block. So I went through this process, not only with the Instagram ad, but with several other companies, so I could do a really good thorough analysis. And the Instagram ad salesperson, account executive, when he got on with me, he was the only rep that researched me, knew who his audience was, and custom tailored the process for me to buy. The other 4 opportunities made me go through this unbelievable, ridiculous waiting game of like, am I even going to hear back from it? Like, I have money to spend. I'm a qualified buyer. What is wrong with these people? Yeah. And anyhow, one guy at one of the companies took the Zoom call from some sort of like swing that he had inside of his apartment and was holding his laptop like this while we were on. And he actually had it down. So I was like looking up his nose. And then through the call, he's like, my computer's running out of battery, like doing this to go over to his table to get a charger. I'm like, this is how salespeople sell? Yeah. Anyway, so I'm not trying to bore you with all these stories, but the guy who got my business was the one who showed up, and he's like, it looks like you know a thing or two about payroll, so how do you want to go about this meeting? I'm like, oh, Thank you. So we had an
Right to the top.
unbelievable sales process. He was tremendous. He's also super smart. He could demo his own software. He demoed it for me right on the call. We went straight to pricing, and I made a decision. Even though I still had to go through the annoying BDR qualification, like, people, can you just kill that process? Like, okay, so on inbound leads, kill the process. On that, as a CRO, I have recently bought some software. And yet again, I was buying intent software and data source software. Awful experience, Randy. I'm
Yeah.
just like, why does it
rampant.
take this many steps, and why am I repeating myself on every single meeting? Do you guys
Yep.
not talk to each other? And
rampant.
why is there such a lag time in getting things scheduled? I even had some of those intro calls get canceled on me,
Yeah.
or reps not show up. I'm like, what day and age are we living in? Are these companies just so spoiled with their brand recognition that they just don't have to show up and take care of the buyer? I mean, it was so bad. So yet again, the intent software we ended up buying was because the salesperson was one of the best salespeople I've ever bought from in my life, and he knows this, and I talk about him on stages all the time. But he was so custom tailored to what we needed on our timeline, so thorough, so communicative, so smart, could demo it himself. That's the kind of salesperson we need to be putting in front of buyers. And I do think, like, there's so much that companies can be doing right now, especially because sales are down for a lot of companies, pipelines are down, length of sales process has elongated. We have a lot of things that we're seeing with the shift in the economy. If you're not putting the best of the best person, especially on your inbound leads, to get to conversion, like, you're messing up. If you're giving new reps or underperforming reps an opportunity with these, it's like, you got to reevaluate what you're doing, because that buyer's going to get super frustrated and you're walking away from revenue. Like, you got to put the best ones in front of it. But there's just 2 examples there. Hopefully people enjoyed the demonstration.
Those are great examples, and we see it all the time here as well. I think part of it was, like, with the pandemic, for some companies there was all this demand that was coming in. They had to establish these formal processes, and they haven't adapted over the past couple of years, because you are right, it is so much different now than it was 12, 18 months ago. So drawing from those experiences that you just had recently, what could a RevOps professional at those companies do to help mitigate some of that rigidness of the process in order to make it a more buyer-friendly way?
Well, first and foremost, voice of the customer surveys are some of the greatest things. Those aren't a survey you send out. Those are live conversations to get direct feedback from the person who just went through the process on the buyer side. There's so much value in those, and I think they're completely underrated. And I do believe that that is one avenue to understanding what the buyer actually wants, what they found beneficial, what they found frustrating, what worked for them, what didn't work, what they would love to see more of, less of. I think that that's tremendous. And even being bold enough to ask them how it compares to other companies that they've met with. It's also soliciting feedback when you win and when you lose deals, to understand what step of the process it started not to resonate with them, where it kind of fell apart. And I'm not just talking about sales. I'm actually talking about process, steps of the process. Sometimes you need to hear feedback like, we didn't want to wait X amount of time to get a demo, or we found it frustrating that the first person who demoed for us wasn't the same person who demoed for us the second time, because we found that second person wasn't as effective. That's when we brought our executive team in. Like, there are things that you could learn in the process that by asking people for the feedback. It's like, what a concept, right? Let's go to the buyer, let's go to the customer, and let's point blank ask. Sometimes we can't get that data. I love secret shopping. I love finding out what the competition is doing. So secret shopping is key. Now, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I understand why some companies have a rigid inbound qualification process, because they are screening out, and they have found that as a part of their revenue funnel efficiency, that in some cases it's almost worth the risk to frustrate a qualified buyer with rigidity of process, because they may have a volume of unqualified leads, spam, fraud, whatever doesn't fit our ICP, and they have found that putting in the qualification steps helps weed out some of the crap out of their funnel, and they get better. So I understand that. There's never like a perfect answer on this, but I do believe that a RevOps team has got to look at the data. So there's objective and subjective. You can look at the data, you can understand, like I run a funnel report, I live off of this report, and I look at it by team that I have, so I can see who's converting what percentage to each step. And then above the funnel, so it starts with deal stage 1 that I'm looking at, I want to look at who's not converting. So very transparently, I found a performance challenge because we had a rep that had the lowest conversion rate from discovery to demo, whereas everyone else was almost 100% conversion from discovery to demo, except for a few rare cases of sales unqualified being the deal stage coming out. And I'm like, this is a massive issue. We have a wrong fit in a role because there isn't enough value being created. The conversation's not strong enough. So of course, first thing you do is you're going to hit it with training and enablement and work through, but eventually you may come to the conclusion it's a wrong fit for a role. So like that's real. But being able to look at the conversion step process, but then we need to take it back a step. So not just funnel from deal stage 1, but how are you feeding the funnel? Where is it coming in? And I do believe that RevOps is not sales ops, because how do you feed the funnel? You have brand awareness activities that are like ultra top of funnel. You have all of your social, then you have your marketing channels that are very defined, very specific, very strategic. Then you're going to have things like your event strategy, but you'll have big national trade shows, you'll have target events, you'll then have networking events, you'll have those you sponsor, those you exhibit, those you attend, all these different granular layers. And so a RevOps professional can truly understand this data and understand when it comes from this level of a lead source, how it then also converts through the funnel, and other metrics like what's a great average revenue, what's the health of a deal. So when you take the data components of it and then you couple that with actually asking about the experience, you're starting to understand what does the buyer actually want. When you can go through some secret shopping, sorry, that led me down a tangent, but when you can actually do some secret shopping and understand what the competition is doing, it's very, very helpful, because I think we don't have to recreate the wheel. When somebody gets, it's like, this is good. Like when people started to put calendar links on their website, that removes friction from the sales process.
Yep.
That's awesome, right? We're going to roll ours out. We just had to redefine our geographic areas, our segmentation. If anybody tries to go fact check me and they look at the website and they're like, PNI does not have a schedule function on here. It's not there yet, because I don't rush to roll things out that aren't going to be the right result. So I'd rather delay and wait to build the right infrastructure. So I had to build all those things internally. Then we'll get the calendar links on, and we're going to have our screening questions and things, because there's a lot of fraud in the payroll industry. So we have to be able to screen out fraud and do other things. So anyway, there's a lot of steps for that. But that's another area. Like, you have to identify and understand where you can fix it and then convert it.
How does a RevOps person who's doing the things to identify the friction, but then they go to the person who's leading the SDR organization and say, we've got to change the process because this is not aligned with how the buyer wants to buy, but yet you're being measured on the amount of conversion from first SDR meeting to AE handoff. How do they go about overcoming some of those challenges where a frontline manager or leader has a metric that they're being measured by, and the RevOps person says, yes, but this is not what the customer wants, clearly through the data? How do you work through that? How does a RevOps leader who has gone through and done the analysis and has the data on how the customer wants to buy, right? They're identifying the friction in the process. So in the example of, I don't need an SDR qualifying me through these 5 or 6 questions. And so they go to the SDR leader and they say, look, we've got to streamline this a little bit. But the SDR leader says, yeah, but I'm measured on my amount of leads that we are able to qualify and turn over to an AE. How does a RevOps person overcome those competing priorities?
Yeah, that's a challenge, isn't it? And that's real. And it happens everywhere. And I feel like that's where a chief revenue officer takes the data from RevOps and advocates inside the organization for change. Yep. That is why when I opened this call, I said I have the privilege of being a real chief revenue officer, somebody who was given, say, an authority over all of revenue, not a glorified sales leader, because that's where I believe conflict is created. Because revenue, we're looking at one funnel, and yet we have all these department heads and initiatives, and if we're not talking to each other and collaborating, a chief revenue officer should own, in my opinion, and it's different with different size companies, stages of companies, if they're in growth mode, if they're in maintenance mode, or, there's always nuance, okay? But if the incentive plan or the metrics plan doesn't align with the way that the buyer wants to buy, and it's prohibiting us from doing the things that we need to do in order to move revenue through the funnel, especially right now, we have to change it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There are no other options. If you put me at that table to say, what do? We change it.
Yep.
Nothing is more important than creating an experience that is going to create conversion. If we're doing work for the sake of doing work, or we're tracking metrics for the sake of tracking metrics, or we're paying out on metrics that don't incentivize the right behavior to get conversion, we have it all wrong. And that's one of the pieces that I love about a chief revenue officer. For years in my last company, the first couple of years we were fractional VPs of sales, but I took that pivot in 2019 to learn revenue operations, learn marketing, learn go-to-market strategy. And the last 2.5 years that I ran that company, I was a very outspoken advocate for a real chief revenue officer and helping people understand what this role does. And the other thing is it takes time. You look at VPs of marketing, VPs of sales, CMOs, average tenure in those roles are like 18 to 22 months, maybe 24, super high turnover. Because executive leaders, I think it rests on two things. One, they don't know what that role really does. They're not also given the right budget, the right runway. I think that it's a very difficult role to understand, but I also think that there are a lot of people in those roles that maybe aren't the right people. So a lot of issues happening at that level. But ideally, a chief revenue officer should be given the budget, the ramp, the time, and the ability to go through this process. Audit, research, build, test, optimize, and scale. So many times companies, especially in growth mode, or they're trying to cure a revenue plateau, like the budget is going to the CRO that we're hiring. And then the CRO is like, well, I need $1 million. No, our budget went to you. We have you now, so do the thing. It's like, well, the thing costs money, and I need a team, and I need technology, and I need time. And I think the biggest thing that we don't get is the time. It's like, oh, we have the person now. Okay, we let you spend the money on the technology you needed. We let you hire the people. Okay, but I also need the time in order for the seed planting to occur and the harvest to grow.
Yep.
I don't know if I answered the question. What was the question? Oh, SDR, yeah. So the RevOps to the SDR manager. I truly think that RevOps needs to work with the CRO as long as the CRO has oversight of all of revenue. Because then the data, then the CRO is the advocate for the change. I think it would be a very difficult situation for a RevOps professional to have to go make a case to a siloed department to tell them that data says they should be doing something differently, but it's in opposition of how they're managed, the metrics that they're managed to, which is like their job rides on it and potentially compensation.
Yep.
Lost cause.
Yeah. Without that alignment from a CRO who's bringing those together, it's nearly impossible. Let's pull that thread a little bit on time and needing the time. So, you've got the right systems in place, you're collecting the data, you've got the analytics. How often should a RevOps leader look at the changing buyer dynamics in order to make those changes?
I look at them every day. I don't know any other answer than that, especially in the economy and market that we're in right now. Things are changing. Everything in a post-COVID era. I feel like COVID sped up. I mean, look what it did to the supply chain. Look what it did to innovations in e-commerce. Look what it did to video conferencing and other technologies that enable us to be a remote workforce. And it sped up so quickly, but then it kind of like demolished other concepts and industries and ways of doing things. And I still feel like the market and the buyers, it's all recalibrating. It's not 100%. Smoothed out. Like we don't have a linear, this is the data set, and this is going to be what it's going to be now. So let's build everything around this. There's an agility that has to be built in to everything that we have right now. So case in point, I started on contract in this job in October. It took me like 3 months to get a clue. I mean, I was trying to hit low-hanging fruit, I was trying to understand what was working, what wasn't working, immerse myself as much as possible, but I was fractional. So I was a fractional CRO for the first 4 months. I was owning and running my company while so I did the best that I could. I wasn't all in. I was pushing maybe 15 to 20 hours a week, not enough time. I went full time on January 30th. And when I went full time, it was like double full time. I mean, I went in all in. We're talking 60, 80 hours a week. When I got in there, I had to focus on understanding how the buyer had changed because I hadn't worked in payroll since 2017. So I'm like, how has the buyer changed? What do we need to be doing in this post-COVID era? Where are they? What channels will we find them? What's working? What's converting? And so there was a hypothesis that was built. So I said audit, research, and then build and test. So this hypothesis was, I think this is the plan. So I had a plan, like a bridge plan to get us through the end of the fiscal year, which expired on June 30th. And so really from January 30th to June 30th, I was like, this is like our bridge plan. But during the bridge plan, to do the best that we could, to do our rebrand, but to still drive volume into the pipeline and close business. In addition, I was building a whole brand new team. I hired a plethora of people, rolled out new technologies, and the plan was to launch this whole new team and tech stack and everything, a way of doing things on July 1. And that's exactly what we did. So I had a hypothesis. We did some building and testing through the remainder of our fiscal, and now we've been live for 8 weeks. There's some good data here, and I'm already making changes.
Wow.
Because if I wait, I originally thought 90 days was a good, let me do 90 days. But I already see leading indicators in the first 60 days that nothing in the next 30 days is going to change my opinion on what I've seen in the first 60 days. And I've been monitoring them every single day to understand when I'm going to need to pivot in order for us to not build a huge deficit. So we're not hitting our number right now, and that's okay. Majority of teams aren't hitting their number right now. That's fine. But 8 weeks in, I'm making changes because I don't want to accumulate a deficit that I'm not going to be able to get out of before the end of this fiscal year.
Yep.
And so every day I'm accumulating debt. And I, as a chief revenue officer, I have to be able to look at the data, interpret the data, and pivot timely without disrupting too much. And it's hard. But it's hard.
Let me ask you the very tough question to answer. How much change is too much, right? How much change can you roll out before it's just too much?
Yeah. Okay. I would, because everybody has their own level of change that they can endure, it really is a question dependent on the people that you're surrounding yourself with. Too much change is the change that hinders an employee's well-being, or it hinders the ability to hit a target. Because I would say change that allows you to hit the target, but you burn people out or you lose people along the way, or you create an environment that just isn't sustainable, even if you hit the target, that was too much change. I don't think it's worth it. So I think the fine line is as least disruptive as possible while still protecting the ability to hit that number. If that answers the question. I can dive deeper, but it's just a job, for goodness sakes. Like, we can't have people as casualties just to win. Because unfortunately I know that because I did it in my business and I burned out a lot of team members. As a startup scale-up CEO, it was like a win at all costs mentality, and I'm already like super type A, high capacity, top performer, high standards. It's a bad mix.
Yeah, it's the reason why I asked the question is, look at what's happening right now, and I think it's a function of sort of where we've been the past couple of years after the pandemic, is the traditional ways of building top funnel anyway, of reaching out through email and picking up the phone and trying to get people on the phone. It's just not working the way that it was before. How much do you have to double down on sort of what has been successful in the past, but it's not working now, versus find other ways? And this ties into, I think, the buying experience, right? The reason why people are not responding back to emails, they're getting inundated with way too many. They're doing research on their own. They don't have to speak to a salesperson right away because there's more available to them to when they're in market, they can do more on their own. So I guess it ties a little bit into the friction and the change sort of tie in together. So what are you seeing as far as like for revenue operations leaders? How do they look at like the metrics in which they should look at the changing buyer dynamics or friction to help them understand whether or not what they're doing is good or they need to make those changes?
Yeah, well, I'm in the thick of that right now because that's part of what I'm evaluating in our go-to-market is how we're doing lead gen. And in order to accumulate data out of the gate, I got budget and permission to try a whole lot of different things.
Yeah.
Because I just don't know the answer to that question until we go accumulate the data. So for me, we're doing it all right now. I mean, we have irons, every iron you can think of in the fire, as far from the digital side to in-person donut drops to handwritten direct mail, like hand addressed direct mail, and everything in between. Intent software, email sequences, social media, organic, paid media, organic content. I mean, you name it, we're doing it right now.
Yep.
And here's what's interesting is I feel like we were warned. Like, how many podcasts did you listen to? Blogs did you read? Seminars that you sat in? People that you heard say, the buyer takes themselves 80% of the way before they engage sales. Like, this is a stat. It was like a warning that was spoken to all of us revenue leaders for the last 5 years. This stat has been so popular. I've also said it in my presentations. The buyer is now taking themselves 80% of the way. What are you doing to create an experience for your buyer that they're choosing you as a top contender during their 80% process? And I still feel like revenue leaders are not clued in on this. And so we had a good economy, we had good inbound. That has changed. Teams now are rushing to figure out how to do outbound again. But then now, like you just said, we are killing our buyers because we're just inundating them. And it's so noisy. How are you going to stand out? How are you going to stand out? And so I have some guesses that I'm working to validate. I think the relationship, whoever owns the relationship is going to win.
Yep.
So are we going to go back to finding our referral partners, our trusted advisors, our COIs, and building strategically on top of other reps like us who have the relationship, but we have a non-competing sale? Are we going to double down on the 80% educational component on our marketing efforts? Are we going to get more creative from a brand awareness standpoint? Like, I remember when my first company that I started, I helped a business that was in the auto repair, collision repair. And I was kind of newer as an entrepreneur. I had traditional clients where you could do like traditional marketing, you get somebody excited, and then you get a conversion. And he said, Mary, we can't do traditional marketing. You can't like go market to somebody and then they bring in a perfectly fine car because we're a collision repair. We have to be so top of mind for them that when the collision occurs, they don't think of anyone else but us. So how do we do that? And it's all brand awareness, right? So for these people, it's like bus stop advertising, radio advertising, a catchy jingle that you sing over and over and over. It's signage, like billboard signage in the geographic area where they know, scientifically proven, data proven, that they have a radius that's going to bring their car there to serve, and then they need a competitive differentiator that's going to stick out. And their competitive differentiator is that they fight with insurance companies, because in collision repair, what they don't do, because a lot of insurance company will only like authorize refurbished parts, or they cut corners. They will never cut corners. So their big claim to fame on all the radio advertising, everything is always about like, we fight with insurance companies because you deserve the absolute best in your car and not cut corners. So that all resonated. So their campaign was so wildly different. So are we intimately understanding our buyer, where the conversion point is, and the education that needs to happen before that? What is the trigger event? And then are we custom tailoring all of that? So in my industry specifically, we're selling payroll and HR services. We sell to HR and finance and accounting people. And then we have executive decision makers. Typically, they're usually not super ingrained in the process depending on the size of the company, but like our champions are users of the technology. Those are all HR payroll people. But we need to get the relationship with them, and we need the brand awareness so that they even know that we exist. So for me, I'm focusing on where we can get in front of them, like physically in front of them. So events is huge for us right now, as well as getting the right content out online and in the right channels so that we can be a partner in educating them. We're also helping with like SHRM certifications, continuing ed credit, working on that angle to get the people out and getting in front of them. But for every business is going to be different. It's just how are you doing the exercise to figure it out?
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm going to play it back a little bit, the way in which we build top of funnel for right now, the way in which we have to go get the attention, get the interest is changing. And we are trying many different things right now to try to make that happen. Does the measurement in which we know whether or not we're successful, does that change? As you're changing the how, does the what actually change? Meaning we need so many leads in order to have the right conversion. And it's a different time element, right? You're spending time doing donut drop-offs, or you're spending time at events. So how do you change the metrics to make sure you still hit your growth numbers when the method's actually changing?
Yes. Well, I think personally, what I will start looking at is the revenue attribution. So if I want to look at patterns, I don't think we're going to get a conversion off of one touch point. Mm-hmm. So I want to use some revenue attribution reporting to be able to understand when it's this combination of activities, this is when I get conversion. So as an example, if I'm running two different sequences, let's say a sequence is a connect on LinkedIn, an email, automated email with some customization, a phone call, a LinkedIn message, another email, another phone call, and then I send them, a letter. If that's the sequence, it's all digital, it's all from behind my desk, then what is the conversion? How many touch points? Like at what step in the process did I get a yes, no, an unsubscribe, or a conversion step? But then if I look at something that's more like where they saw us at an event, they got enrolled in a sequence, but we had a touch point, the first touch point was at an event, or we did a drop, or we did a thing that was more in person, how many steps of the process until we got the conversion? Then what happens if we just get the introduction through a COI? Then a lot of times through a trusted, there's no LinkedIn Connect, there's no drop, there's no mailer, there's no email, there's no phone call. Like if we look at the steps of the process, but we have to do it all, in my opinion. Like we should be diversifying our revenue streams. Yep. We should be diversifying our lead sources, diversifying our activity. If we're doing a whole lot of a little bit of a whole lot of things, when we have a lot of opportunities, and this is where we have diversification in the funnel. But if you run this over time and the data comes back to say that your conversion point is 300% greater don't do the other stuff anymore. Cut it. Yeah. And that kind of went to my earlier comment. Like this is where RevOps, when they're able to help identify efficiency inside of revenue funnels, like I was saying earlier, whereas from a buyer perspective, I didn't really love having to go through all the steps of qualification and repeating myself. But maybe that company had the data to say that when their account executives only had meetings put on their calendar that were high value prospects ready to buy of this size, number of employees, whatever, then they sold $2 million a year. But when we let a lot of the funnel come through, it actually hindered their efficiency inside of the funnel, and it attacked their efficiency 50%, and they're only selling $1 million a year. Well, that's an issue.
Right.
So then I can see why the company wants to work harder to screen people out, even though it's not in the best experience of the buyer. So, revenue is fun, isn't it?
What I love about that, and I think you nailed it, is let the data. You have to have the data to help you understand where we make those changes and how we might change the metrics. So love that. Okay, we're at a point in the call where we're going to change it up a little bit, the formatting, and it's going to be a little bit more rapid fire. So first question I'll ask is, what's one book that you've loved in the recent past?
Yeah, so I'm a woman of faith, which is difficult to exist in corporate America or in the marketplace. So most of the literature that I read is very faith-based, and my favorite recent book would be Crazy Love by Francis Chan.
And why is that? Tell me a little more about that. Why do you love that book?
Well, I love it because it convicts me and it keeps me centered on reminding myself what's important. I love being in revenue. I love being an executive leader. I love doing this, but this is not why I was created and put on the planet. And it's a constant reminder of me as a human that I have the ability to create an experience for people that I interact with that improves their lives, like being the love and the light, humility, grace, kindness, mercy, all of those things that come from the fruit of the Spirit. I have an opportunity to be that for people that I work with, my clients, my employees, my colleagues, teammates, peers, inside, outside the company. And it's a good centering activity for me to immerse myself in that book, to remember that, yes, that's great. I know a couple of things about sales and marketing, and that's awesome. And maybe I'll be successful in my career, but at the end of the day, that's not what I'm going to be remembered by. And I don't believe that's why I was created. So how can I be the love and the light and carry this out? And so this book just is a pure conviction in my heart to remember that like all this stuff I do professionally is cool and all, but at the end of the day, I'm here for something greater.
So true. And I completely believe that as well. One of the things I love about doing these calls is my reading list is now going higher and higher, right? So I'm going to be adding that to my list. Let's talk about your favorite part about being a CRO.
I know, I think it's just a compliment that I've been entrusted with so much. I think for me, that allows me to look back on my career and know it was all worth it. And to sit in this seat and to realize that I have executives and the owners of our company that have looked at me to say, we believe in you, we trust you. It's one of the greatest feelings I've ever had professionally. One of the biggest jobs I've ever had. I thought being a founder CEO was hard, and it was extremely hard for different reasons.
Yeah.
This was so different, and it's exciting, and it's just injected me with this new life and passion. But I think the best thing about it is receiving the compliment that somebody believes in me and trusts me as much as they do, that they've put me in this seat.
Yeah, that's awesome. On the flip side, what's the least favorite part about your job? Or said it a different way, what's hard about your job?
Yeah. That I own all of revenue. I mean, it's just the inverse.
Yeah.
It's hard because it's really easy to mess up.
Yeah.
When you have this much responsibility and you're trying to get it so intricately connected, well, we all know if one piece goes out, it can have that snowball effect. And so it's a lot, it's hard. And some days, there's a little bit of fear of when I make this quick decision, am I forgetting who this might impact? But I have to move at a speed and a pace if we're going to accomplish the growth and the scale.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. And there's always that little voice of like cautioning myself. It's hard. It's a big responsibility.
Yeah. It's one that I think also comes with experience, to just trust that it's okay not to know everything. It's okay to do some things. It's okay to mess up once in a while, but have trust in yourself, right? What's the one piece of advice that you've received from someone that stayed with you that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I don't know who said it, and I don't know if it's a famous quote, but early in my career, someone said to me, attitudes are contagious. Is yours worth catching? And it has stayed with me because I've realized that if I'm having a challenging day or a bad day, it doesn't mean that everyone around me then also has to have a bad day because I'm just venting or bringing them down, or the inverse. When I'm in a good mood, and I'm in a good mood a lot, but like when I'm optimistic and happy and full of joy and just taking things as they come through the day, I also know that that's infectious. And what a beauty that is, that if I carry myself in a way, I can have that spread. And who doesn't want more joy in their life and
Right.
more fun, even on the hard days? So
Yep.
that always stood with me, to be really aware of my attitude.
Yeah, I love that. Last one for you, Mary. What's the one piece of advice for people who want to have your job someday? What would you recommend to them?
Learn all of revenue. Well, if you're a marketing leader right now and you want to be a CRO, go take a sales job. Even if you go take a part-time job on the weekends, go sell something, retail, go waitress, go work somewhere where you have to do a sales-esque job. Don't just shadow it inside of your company. Feel the pressure of doing it. If there are newspapers, get a newspaper. I don't know, like go do something where you have to sell, go door to door, go do some side gig where you have to learn how to sell. If you are a salesperson, go launch a little thing. Go launch a little e-commerce site. Go get a drop ship company, like a bag of coffee. Design it. Go try to sell it to your friends. Run an e-com business. Understand marketing. Launch a few social media channels. Try to be a content creator. Blog. Write. Like go actually do the things. Go get a Canva account. Learn basic graphic design. And I just feel like an effective CRO cannot do this unless you have actually done the jobs of it. You need to learn the customer success side, like go sit with your customer team, field a couple of support calls.
Yeah.
And see what that's like to have to turn around a customer or work to retain or upsell. Like go do the work in order to be able to sit in the seat, because I think the respect of a CRO from their teams is strengthened when they can look up and say, well, she actually did those roles. She actually did the job. Like she gets it. She's not just telling us what to do. It's because it's come from experience in her own walk. That would be my advice.
Yeah, not only do you have the street cred because you've been there and sat in those shoes, it all allows you to be empathetic as well. So,
Yes.
well, Mary, that's a wrap on the Revenue Lounge. I want to just thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today. You are infectious. Your attitude is tremendous. I had a lot of fun today. Thank you very much, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.